So the women's game has grown significantly in the last 20 years, with the 2019 World Cup being the most remarkable of them all. But despite that, the women's game still struggles to gain the attention of the people. But to understand why, let's first take a look at the history of the beautiful game. So the first international women's game has said to be played in 1881 between England and Scotland, with the first recorded match taking place in 1892. But unfortunately, in the early 90s, the FA decided to put a ban on the women's game by claiming that it was unladylike, it would cause physical harm to the women, and it was unsuitable for women to play as it's not a women's sport. And of course, this ban was put in place by the FA Council, that was a group of male officials that did not even decide to get any input from the female footballers or the women's game stakeholders at that time.
Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
Now, despite that, the women still continued to play football, but it was unofficial and unaffiliated, which means that the women's game did not get to grow in a way as the men's game did at that time, and we can see those consequences today.
One eternity later.
Now, the ban was lifted in 1971, but despite that, it has not gained much interest up until the 1999 World Cup between the USA and China. Now, even if you've never seen or heard of this match before, I'm pretty sure you've seen this picture somewhere. This picture of Brandy Chastain marks one of the most revolutionary moments in the women's game, and most of the progress that the women's game has seen came after that. With an attendance of 90,185, it is no wonder that this game is considered as one of the most remarkable games in the history of women's football, and it's one of the most important ones as well. Now, I can sit here and complain all day about how the ban has affected the women's game, and it did not let the women's game progress as much as the men's game did. But that will not solve the problem that we have today, which is the women's game is not getting as much attention as the men's game. Now, before you go down in the comment section and say that
the women's game is just not as interesting and the women are just not as good as the men,
yes, I do acknowledge there are quality differences. Some that are in our control and some that are not so much. So let's talk about what we have in control and what we can change. Now, the first thing people don't realize is that the men's game was actually just as bad when it first started. Now, there's no doubt that the women's game can undergo massive improvements, and we are still far from what the peak performance of the women will be in this game. But the women's game is still in its infancy. And if we take a look at the men's game in its infancy, we would realize that there are not much differences that we see today. Ball bouncing around the pitch, the keeper coming out to punch the ball and missing it only for it to lead to a goal, dangerous tackles being made, they all seem pretty similar to what we see today. Now, the stadium still looks pretty full. Was it entertaining? Maybe. But it could also be a possibility that that was the only sport people had to watch at that time, or maybe the only kind of football people had to watch at that time, and so they had no choice and they watched it. And because they watched it, it grew. Whether they loved it or they had no choice, people decided to watch the game, and therefore the game grew. Now, it took the men's game time to reach to where it is today, and it has been played for more than 100 years now. Although most of the advancements came in the recent years, the fact that there wasn't any other football to focus on back in the day meant that the men's football got all the focus at that time, and people managed to pour their heart and soul into the game to make it a more entertaining one to watch. Now, the women's game has only been around for about 50 years, but it is no doubt that due to the unlimited options that are out there, the women's game isn't studied as deeply as the men's game was back in the day. Therefore, it may seem like the women's game has a long way to go given the circumstances. Now, you may argue that there was no proper technology or proper coaching back in the day, and we have that now. So why isn't the women's game progressing? Well, let's just say the men's game has the technology. The women's game, not so much. And this brings me on to my second point, which is the women's game doesn't actually have that kind of technological advancement as the men's game does. First of all, let's look at the difference in research done between the men's and the women's game. The British Journal of Sports Medicine published an article in 2019 whereby they analyzed the amount of research done between the men's and the women's game for a 10-year period between 2007 and 2017. They found that the men's game got significantly more research attention, with 90.9% of the articles being about the men's game. Damn! And only 9.1% being about the women's game.
This is the worst!
And not just that, but even the staff members in the men's and women's team vary significantly. The Arsenal men's team has said to have 500 team and staff members, whereas the women's team has only about 50. Now, although there's no confirmation that there are only 50 staff members in the Arsenal women's team, according to a statement from Viviana Miedema, it seems like the women's team has a significantly smaller number of staff members than the men's team does.
We spelen 20 meer wedstrijden per jaar, maar we hebben niet meer fysio's, we hebben niet betere faciliteiten. Heel veel clubs hier in de competitie hebben niet eens een fulltime fysio, maar wel 20 meiden die op professionele basis voetballen. Het zijn gewoon niet de juiste prioriteiten. Dus in plaats van dat wij als club zijn de 2 fulltime fysio's aan gaan stellen om het team van 18 meiden fit te houden, laten we 1...
And now FIFA even looking to ban the Women's World Cup in the top 5 European countries because the bid for the broadcasting rights have been disappointing to say the least. According to FIFA, some European countries have decided to bid almost 100 times less for the women's game compared to the men's game. Although we clearly know that the demand for the women's game has risen in the past few years. But that's a video for another time. And these are only a few examples, as the training facilities, academy fundings and investments in clubs are significantly lower when it comes to the women's game. Now, another reason for the women's game to gain attention is that it's an inspiration for young children everywhere, especially young girls. Now, with the game being withheld for so long, young girls finally get to see people that look like them on the bigger stages. This poses a much-needed positive impact on the young ballers, as they too realize that one day they can achieve those heights. And with the recent growth that the women's game has seen, young girls everywhere can now watch their idols play either on television or in the stadiums. With the USA winning the 2019 World Cup, England winning the 2022 Euros, and Australia's impressive performances in their recent international matches that even earned them a Disney Plus documentary, it is safe to say that not only young girls but even young boys will soon find idols in the women's game. Now, with all that being said, I'm not going to sit here and force you into watching the women's game. That's not how this works. But the women's game surely deserves more attention, if not more respect. All I would say is that please do not leave any obscene comments under the women's football videos just because women are playing it. And if you haven't watched the game in a while, or your judgments are based on videos titled "Women's Football Sucks" or "Funny Moments in Women's Football," then I'd suggest you reevaluate your judgment. The love for the game can only be developed if you watch it because you actually love it and not because you're forced to or you're being called a sexist. But remember, there's a difference between being mean and being critical. So please think twice before leaving comments in the comment section under videos, as young ballers might read them and it might affect the way they look at things. Just remember that the great game we see today would not have been great if no one decided to watch it when it was not great. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.